Well, today we're going to wrap up the book of Nahum as we close out chapter 3 today before moving on to the story of Habakkuk tomorrow. As excited that I am to move into that book tomorrow, I'm excited about finishing up this one today. As we've walked through this story of the book of Nahum, we see Nahum as a prophet bringing an oracle, a prophetic message of judgment and condemnation on the people of Assyria and Nineveh and their king. He's exposed them. He's exposed who they are. He's exposed how they've worked. And in this final chapter, we see this final message of this woe against them, this oracle against them, this prophetic message that their days, their wickedness, their pride is all coming to an end. And that God is going to expose them, and the people of Assyria, the king of Assyria, will be no more. The world will look upon them in joy as they see them collapse, and they'll see their pride laid out and their shame laid out on full display for the world. God starts off this message with this very strong, kind of brutal condemnation. He says, "Woe to the bloody city, all full of lies and plunder, and no end to prey." He says, "Woe to you, this wicked city, full of lies, full of plunder, full of blood." He says, "You have been a wicked city, so woe against you." That's why in these first 7 verses, he's going to show that they have played the prostitute. They've led other nations away from God into their territory. They've abused them. They've exploited them. They've benefited from having them. They didn't benefit from being taken captive. And we're going to see this in the first 7 verses as Nahum lays out this message of condemnation, this oracle against them. Look at it says. It goes on in verse 2. "The crack of the whip and the rumble of the wheel, the galloping of horses and bounding chariot, horsemen charging flashing sword and glittering spear, hosts of slain, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end. They stumble over their bodies. That you have done so much destruction. You have carried out so much death that you're tripping over your corpses." Look at verse 4. "And all for the countless whorings of the prostitute, graceful and of deadly charms, who betrays the nations with her whorings and peoples with her charms." It says, you as a city have played the whore. You've been a prostitute, leading other nations astray. You say you are going to benefit them, and we see this throughout the book of 1 Kings, that they led nations like Judah away, promising them wealth, promising them prosperity, but in all reality, they were going to take them, exploit them, and bring them into captivity. He says, you've been a prostitute, a whore. And because of this, look at verse 5. "Behold, I am against you." God, in his holiness, has to stand against sin. He has to. This is what a direct response of God's holiness does and requires of him. "Behold, because of this, behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts." And listen how strong this language is as he exposes who they are. I will lift up your skirts over your face. And I will make nations look at your nakedness and kingdoms at your shame." In ancient times, in periods such as this, when men and women were caught in prostitution and caught in whoredom like they would be stripped of their clothes, laid out in the city square, so the entire world, the entire cities, would look upon their shame and mock them because of the works, because of the acts that they had done. So Nahum's using this imagery, God's speaking through him, using this imagery to say that you have led all these nations astray. You have prostituted yourself out. You've been the whore. You're not them, it's you. And because of your sin, because of your wickedness, I'm going to strip you. Meaning, it's not about their clothes. He's actually going to strip them of their pride, of all their might, of all their greatness, of all the worth that they thought they had. He's going to lay them bare before the entire world, and all will look upon them. Verse 6, "I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle." He says, I'm going to put you on full display, and everyone's going to look at you and see your nakedness, see your shame, see you for who you really are. Look how verse 7 ends. "And all who look at you will shrink from you and say, 'Wasted is Nineveh, who will grieve for her. Where shall I seek comforters for you?'" Those 7 verses are strong messages of judgment and condemnation as it falls on the pride of Nineveh. They thought that they were this amazing city that no one could touch, but here God is going to strip them down and expose them for who they really were. Expose them for who they really were. Show them the entire world all their shame, all their ugliness, all their wickedness. And in the next section, we start moving into these different taunts. The first one being in verses 8 through 11, we see historically as Nahum's going to compare the people of Assyria to another city, Thebes. Thebes was a different part of the 100 miles towards the border of Egypt. They thought their proximity to Egypt allowed them to be prosperous, also allowed them to be protected. But we know from history that they fell. They fell at the hands of the Assyrians. The Assyrians came in and took over Egypt, and they took over Thebes as well. And he's going to use this kind of imagery to show, hey, you're no better off than they were. You thought you were impenetrable, you thought you were safe, you thought you were protected, but they still fell, and so will you. Look what he goes on to say. Are you better than Thebes, that sat by the Nile with water around her rampant at sea, and water her wall? Cush was her strength, Egypt too, that without limit put, and the Libyans were her helpers. He's saying there, they had the water to protect them. They had all these natural borders around them. They had friends and allies like Cush and Egypt and the Libyans. But none came to help. And at the end of the day, they fell. No one came to their aid. Look how it says in verse 10, yet she became an exile. She went into captivity. Her infants were dashed in pieces at the head of every street. For her honored men lots were cast, and all her great men were bound in chains. You also will be drunken. You will go into hiding. You will seek refuge from the enemy. He says, just as Thebes fell, so will you. They got taken into captivity, into exile, and we'll see here in the end, you are going to be scattered. Your nation will collapse, and you have nowhere to go. God is taunting them, comparing what they've done to those around them, showing that the same thing they did to Thebes will now happen to them. The second taunt we see is one that's attacking their military. Look at verse 12 through 15. It's, all your fortresses are like fig trees. That's not a very strong fortress. It's not a very strong fortress. All are all like fig trees with first ripe figs. If shaken, they fall into the mouth of the eater. Says, your fortresses can be easily overtaken. Your fortresses are not strong. You shake it, they're going to fall down. And look how he says his troops. Behold, your troops are women in your midst. Now, at first glance, I know that may sound like a very sexist statement. God's not being sexist here. Nahum's not saying your women are no good. But what he is talking about, think about the all-male troops that would have been fighting at battle in these days and age. If they fell and the walls were penetrated, what would happen to the women, even the children? The men who raided the capital city, the men who raided the cities would go in and do whatever they wanted to with the women, exploit them, abuse them. And they would do the exact same thing to the children. So what Nahum's actually saying here, and what God is speaking through him to suggest, is that your mighty men are basically worthless. You might as well put the women up there at the front. That you're not protecting them. You're not protecting your people. And they are going to fall captive to them. And it says here, the gates of your land are wide open to your enemies. The gates are wide open to your enemy. Fire has already devoured your bars. He says, no matter what you even do, your gates are already open. You might as well just let them walk in. You might as well let them exploit the people, exploit your women, exploit your children. But then he goes into a command here. He says, there will the fire devour you, the sword will cut you off. Sorry, I skipped a verse. Draw water, verse 14. Draw water for the siege. Strengthen your efforts. Go into the clay. Tread the mortar. Take hold of the brick mold. There will the fire devour you, the sword will cut you off. And what he's saying there is in response to this, in response to the fact that you are going to let your women be taken captive because you're not actually a good military, because your fortresses are like fig trees, go ahead and rebuild your walls, rebuild your fortresses, go make bricks. But before your bricks even dry, the fire will devour you, is what he's saying. Spend time getting ready, but in that time, you have already wasted too much time. That God's judgment, God's wrath has come upon you, and there's no stopping it. He says, multiply yourselves like locusts, multiply the grasshoppers. This is how he's moving into the next taunt. Taunting the way that they took advantage of the kingdoms that are around them. They had agents all over the place They would multiply themselves, multiply their economic people, and they go out and take advantage of the kings and kingdoms around them. Multiply yourselves like locusts. Multiply like the grasshopper. You increased your merchants more than the stars of heavens. The locust spread its wings and flies away. Your princes are like grasshoppers. Your scribes like cloud of locusts, settling on the fences in the day of cold. When the sun rises, they fly away. No one knows where they are. And what he's saying there in the end is that basically you've multiplied your economic people. You've sent your agents everywhere. But at the end, they're all going to disappear. They're all going to fly away. When the sun comes up, they'll fly away. Your princes, they'll leave. Your merchants, they'll leave. He's taunting them once again. And after the 3 taunts, he moves his final few verses here to the king of Assyria. He says in verse 18 and 19, your shepherds are asleep, O king of Assyria. Your nobles slumber. Your people are scattered on the mountains with none to gather them. There is no easing your hurt. Your wound is grievous. All who hear the news about you clap their hands over you, for upon whom has not come your unceasing evil. He says, you king, your shepherds who are supposed to be watching over your people, taking care of your people, feeding your sheep, have no idea that their entire sheep are scattered. And you, your shepherds, are all asleep. You're all asleep. You're concerned only with your own needs. You're concerned with only what you need, that you have no idea what your people need. Not only have you treated the world unfairly, you treated your own sheep unfairly, and they have been scattered. And been scattered amongst the mountains, and there's no one to gather them. Meaning, there's no chance for this kingdom to endure. There's no chance for this kingdom to continue, because no one will be able to go gather these people. They'll just be integrated into other societies. They'll just go be part of other nations. There's no easing your hurt. Your wound is grievous. He said there's nothing stopping what is coming for you. What you've done deserves God's wrath. What you've done deserves God's judgment. All who hear this, listen to this, all who hear the news about you will clap their hands over you. Why? For upon whom has not your unceasing evil come? You have brought so much destruction in this world, and your evil, your wickedness will be utterly defeated, and you will fade away. And that's where we see the story of Nahum come to a conclusion. This final message to Nineveh, this final message to the king of Assyria, that their nation is coming to an end. And shortly after this, we know that their destruction did finally come, and pretty much the entire Assyrian nation just faded away. With no traces, they were integrated. The people who were scattered were integrated into other societies, became parts of other people groups. With no left, no fortresses, no economic wealth, no military power, nothing could stand against God. Nothing could stand against them. They're evil against His holiness. His holiness will win every single time. And what Nahum actually ends up pointing to is this, we kind of alluded to this over the last couple of days we've spent in this, is this message against the evil of sin, the evil of this world compared to the goodness and holiness of God. And we find our encouragement knowing, just as Nahum was speaking, that all things, nothing can stand against God. No wickedness, no evil can come up against Him. And while yesterday we live in a day and age where we see evil, we see wickedness as a result of human sin and sin's presence in this world, we know and we trust that one day it will be completely destroyed. That right now, yes, sin may have its grip, sin may have power, sin may have might, and it might spread throughout this entire world, but we know that God will deliver. God will send His judgment against sin. We know that if we read the end of Scripture, we know that at the very end, Revelation says that Jesus wins. We know that because sin tried to destroy Him. We know that death tried to hold Him down, but death could not hold Him down. He rose up in victory, declaring that no longer does death nor sin have a grip on us. Yes, we still experience its presence in this world. Yes, we still experience its presence in our lives, but no longer does it have victory over us. In the same manner, God is looking at sin. God is looking at Satan himself and says, yes, right now, you need to shake before me because your destruction is imminent. You will be completely wiped out. Yes, you may have influenced. Yes, you may have attacked. Yes, you may have had a hand in different things in this world, but your day is coming to an end because my son, Jesus, is victorious. There's so much truth in that. Thank you for walking through the book of Nahum. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to encourage you to go ahead and read just a few chapters of the book of Habakkuk before we introduce it to you tomorrow. See you guys.